Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Imagine giving 30 years of your life to one company. You know every hallway, every client, and every secret to success. Then, one Tuesday morning, you're invited to a meeting. Not for a promotion, but to be told you're being replaced by someone half your age. This is the reality for Arthur. He's a loyal employee facing the retirement push. It's a story about corporate greed, the value of experience, and what happens when your work family decides you're no longer worth the cost. Today, we're going to follow Arthur's journey through 10 chapters. We'll see how he handles a difficult life problem while learning the English phrases you need for the workplace, from passing the torch to downsizing. Is loyalty a thing of the past? Let's find out. Let's get into Chapter 1, The Gold Watch Warning. Arthur stood at the edge of the break room, clutching a lukewarm paper cup of coffee. On the laminate table sat a grocery store cake with Happy 30th written in fading blue frosting. For 3 decades, he had been the first to arrive and the last to leave Miller and Associates. He had seen the company grow from a dusty 3-room office to a glass and steel powerhouse. But today, the air in the room felt thin and clinical, lacking the warmth of a true celebration. His manager, Sarah, whom Arthur had personally mentored years ago, cleared her throat while looking at her watch. She handed him a small, velvet-lined box containing a gold-plated watch that felt surprisingly light. 30 years is a lifetime, Arthur, she said, her voice echoing with a practiced, hollow professional kindness. The board is so grateful for the foundation you built, but we are looking toward a new digital horizon. Arthur felt a cold shiver of intuition as he noticed a young man in a slim-fit suit standing by the door. The stranger was holding a tablet and eyeing Arthur's corner office like a predator measuring a new territory. Sarah didn't introduce him. She simply patted Arthur's shoulder and mentioned a private meeting scheduled for later that afternoon. The phrase "passing the torch" was tossed around like a casual pleasantry, but to Arthur it sounded like a sentence. He looked at his reflection in the glass of the commemorative plaque on the wall. He realized then that the party wasn't a celebration of his presence, but a formal preparation for his absence. The following Monday, Arthur arrived to find a stranger sitting in his guest's chair, feet crossed at the ankles. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her smile tight and efficient as she introduced Leo, the new efficiency consultant. Leo was young, radiating the kind of restless energy that comes from someone who believes everything can be solved with an app. Arthur is our institutional memory, Sarah said, though her tone suggested Arthur was more like an old filing cabinet. The task was simple. Arthur was to spend the week onboarding Leo, showing him the intricacies of the Miller accounts. As they sat together, Arthur realized Leo wasn't interested in the nuances of client relationships or the history of the contracts. Leo kept interrupting to ask about automated workflows and cost reduction benchmarks for the senior staff roles. Every time Arthur explained a complex problem he had solved with years of intuition, Leo simply made a note on his tablet. "That's a lot of manual oversight," Leo remarked, his eyes never leaving the screen. "We can definitely streamline that out." The realization hit Arthur like a physical blow. He wasn't passing on his wisdom to a protege. He was effectively writing the manual for his own replacement, handing over the keys to the castle he had helped build. Leo asked for Arthur's login credentials and a list of his daily responsibilities by the end of the business day. Arthur watched the young man's fingers fly across the glass screen, deleting processes that had taken years to perfect. The shadow behind the desk wasn't just a person, it was the cold, calculated future of the company. By noon, Arthur's desk felt smaller, as if the room itself was already starting to push him out the door. The following afternoon, Arthur was summoned to the corner office for a meeting that wasn't on his digital calendar. The room was occupied by Sarah and a man from Human Resources who sat with a thick manila folder resting on his knees. There was no coffee this time, only a single glass of water placed in front of the chair where Arthur was expected to sit. The HR representative began by praising Arthur's unparalleled legacy, using words that felt scripted and rehearsed. Then came the pivot. The company was moving toward a leaner, tech-first infrastructure that required a different payroll profile. "We want to offer you a graceful exit," Sarah said, sliding a packet of papers across the polished mahogany table. She called it a voluntary early retirement package, emphasizing the word voluntary as if it were a gift. Arthur scanned the document, seeing his 30 years of loyalty distilled into a few months of severance and a non-disclosure agreement. "And if I don't want to volunteer?" Arthur asked, his voice steady despite the sudden pounding in his chest. The HR representative offered a thin, regretful smile and mentioned that his specific position was being sunsetted by the end of the month. The message was clear. He could walk out the front door with a check or be escorted out the back door with nothing. They spoke about his future as if it were a vacation he had been longing for, ignoring the fact that he wasn't ready to stop. Arthur looked at the pen they had placed perfectly parallel to the signature line, its silver barrel reflecting the overhead lights. He realized that in the eyes of the board, he was no longer a person. He was just a line item that cost too much to keep. He didn't sign the papers. He simply stood up, tucked the folder under his arm, and walked out into the silent hallway. Arthur arrived home at 2 in the afternoon, a time when the sun usually hit the pavement in a way he never saw. The driveway was empty, and the house stood tall and indifferent, unaware that its master had been unceremoniously discarded. He let himself in, the click of the deadbolt sounding unusually loud in the midday stillness of the suburban street. He sat at the kitchen table with his coat still on, staring at the mail he had already checked that morning. For 3 decades, this house had been the place he returned to for rest, but now it felt like a cage of quiet. He thought about calling his wife, but the words felt heavy and shameful in his throat, like a confession of failure. He had spent his life being the provider, the rock, and the man with the answers. Now he was just a man with a folder. Every ticking second of the kitchen clock reminded him of the schedule he no longer had to follow. He walked to his small home office, but the sight of his professional books and framed awards only made his chest tighten. He wondered if his neighbors were watching through their curtains, questioning why a man of his age was home so early. The freedom the HR representative had promised felt more like a sudden, terrifying drop into a dark canyon. He opened the fridge, moved a jar of mustard, and closed it again, realizing he wasn't hungry for food, but for purpose. The silence of the house began to amplify the echoes of the meeting, replaying Sarah's cold professional excuses over and over. He realized that without the morning commute and the ringing phones, he didn't quite know who Arthur Miller was supposed to be. As the sun began to set, he sat in the deepening shadows, finally understanding that the hardest part wasn't losing the job, but finding himself. Arthur sat in his home office the next morning, the voluntary retirement folder still sitting unopened on his desk.
He opened his laptop, but instead of checking corporate emails, he found himself staring at a blank document. He felt a strange urge to define the terms of his new reality, as if naming the problem would give him power over it. He wrote down the word redundant in bold letters, feeling the sharp sting of a word that dismissed 30 years of effort. Then he wrote pivot, a word Leo had used 36 times in their short, frustrating training sessions. To the company, a pivot was a strategic shift, but to Arthur it felt like being shoved off a moving train. He realized that the modern workplace had developed a whole new vocabulary designed to mask the coldness of its actions. Resource allocation meant people were being treated like office supplies. Restructuring was just a polite way to say goodbye. He spent the afternoon researching these terms in English, trying to understand the linguistic armor his bosses used to protect themselves. The more he read, the more he understood that his struggle wasn't just about a job, but about a shifting cultural language. He started a second list, words that Leo didn't seem to know: loyalty, nuance, legacy, and stability. These were the old-world values that had built the firm, even if the new digital horizon had no room for them. As he typed, the act of organizing his thoughts into 2 columns began to clear the fog of the previous day's shock. He wasn't just a victim of a downsizing event. He was a man who possessed a dictionary of experience they couldn't buy. Arthur closed his laptop with a firm click, realizing that if he was going to survive, he had to learn to speak for himself.
The following Thursday, the department held a farewell mixer for Arthur in the communal lounge. The room was filled with the smell of cheap Prosecco and the forced hum of people who were afraid of being next. Arthur stood near the window, watching his colleagues navigate the space with a mixture of pity and relief. Some of the older staff shook his hand firmly, their eyes conveying a silent understanding that the same clock was ticking for them. The younger employees, however, treated him with a polite distance, as if his early retirement might be contagious. Leo was the center of the room, effortlessly charming the executive team with a presentation on his new automated reporting suite. He saw Arthur and raised a glass from across the room, a gesture that felt more like a victory lap than a salute. Sarah approached Arthur, offering a small plate of appetizers and asking about his travel plans with a scripted cheerfulness. "You'll finally have time for that golf trip," she said, though she knew perfectly well that Arthur didn't play golf. He realized they were already speaking about him in the past tense, as if he were a ghost haunting his own wake. The speeches were short and filled with platitudes about well-deserved rest and the next exciting chapter. No one mentioned the 30 years of late nights, the crises averted, or the clients he had saved from the brink. When it was his turn to speak, Arthur looked at the room and felt a sudden sharp clarity about his place in this world. He thanked them for the cake, ignored the gold watch in his pocket, and left before the first bottle of champagne was empty. As he walked to his car, he realized that the company hadn't just replaced a worker, they had abandoned a set of values. Arthur sat in front of his computer the next morning, the retirement package still gathering dust on the corner of his desk. He decided he wasn't ready for the quiet life of a retiree and opened a popular job-seeking website for the first time in decades. The digital landscape was a shock to his system, filled with one-click apply buttons and AI-powered matchmaking algorithms. He spent hours updating his resume, trying to translate 30 years of leadership into the keywords the modern market demanded. When he finally hit submit on his first application, he felt a surge of hope that was quickly met with a cold, automated reply.
Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with candidates whose profiles more closely align with our current needs. Arthur realized that to a computer algorithm, 30 years of experience looked like too expensive or too close to retirement. He secured an interview for a mid-level management role, but the video call started with a shock to his confidence. The recruiter was a woman who looked no older than his youngest daughter, wearing a headset and a distracted expression. She asked him about his familiarity with agile Scrum methodologies and his experience with real-time data visualization. Arthur spoke of his ability to lead teams through crises and his deep understanding of client psychology. The recruiter nodded politely, but her eyes kept drifting to a second screen, her smile never reaching her eyes. "We're really looking for a digital native for this specific culture fit," she explained with a rehearsed, breezy tone. Arthur ended the call and sat in the blue light of his monitor, realizing the gap in his resume wasn't a lack of skill. It was a gap of years that the modern world didn't know how to value, leaving him feeling like a relic in a world of fast forward.
The following Tuesday, Arthur was startled by the persistent buzzing of his personal phone on the mahogany desk. He didn't recognize the number, but the area code belonged to the downtown district he had recently fled. It was David, the firm's largest client, whose account Arthur had personally managed for over 15 years. David's voice was frantic, cutting through the pleasantries with a sharp edge of panic and frustration. "Arthur, I don't know what happened, but the new guy, Leo, just wiped out our entire Q3 projection data." Apparently, in his quest for streamlining, Leo had deleted a series of manual overrides that kept the logistics flowing. The automated system had triggered a massive shipping delay that was costing David's company thousands of dollars every hour. "Sarah says you're on a sabbatical, but she can't find the backup files or the contact list for the overseas port." Arthur felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, his mind immediately leaping to the solution he had memorized years ago. He knew exactly which server held the physical backups and which port manager to call to bypass the digital glitch. He sat with the phone pressed to his ear, looking at the voluntary retirement papers sitting in his trash can. He could have stayed silent, letting the digital horizon crumble under the weight of its own arrogance and haste. But as he listened to David's desperation, Arthur realized his loyalty wasn't to the firm, but to the work itself. "I'm not on sabbatical, David," Arthur said, his voice regaining the authority he thought he had lost forever. He spent the next 3 hours over the phone, guiding a sweating, humbled Leo through the recovery process step by step. When the crisis was finally averted, the silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thank you he had ever heard. The phone call with David didn't just save a client, it shattered the illusion that Arthur was obsolete. The next morning, Sarah called him, her voice trembling with a mixture of forced corporate gratitude and genuine desperation. She offered him a special consultancy role to come back and fix the mess Leo had inadvertently created. Arthur sat in his home office, looking at the sunlight streaming across the floor, and felt a surprising lack of urgency. "I'm not interested in coming back to my old desk, Sarah," he said, his voice calm and resonant. He realized that the push had actually been a shove into a much larger, more rewarding world of independence. Instead of returning as an employee, Arthur spent the weekend drafting a proposal for his own private consulting firm. He reached out to 3 other former clients who had reached out to him after hearing about the Q3 crisis. They didn't care about digital native culture fits or agile Scrum buzzwords. They cared about results and trust. Arthur realized he didn't need a corner office at Miller & Associates to be the man with all the answers. He met David for lunch at a quiet bistro far away from the sterile glass and steel pressure of the corporate district. David offered him a retainer contract that paid more for 10 hours of work than Arthur had made in 40. "I don't need a manager, Arthur," David said, sliding a pen across the table. "I need an expert I can trust." For the first time in 30 years, Arthur was the one holding the pen and setting the terms of the agreement. He signed the contract with a steady hand, finally reclaiming the narrative of his own professional life.
The phone call with David didn't just save a client, it shattered the illusion that Arthur was obsolete. The next morning, Sarah called him, her voice trembling with a mixture of forced corporate gratitude and genuine desperation. She offered him a special consultancy role to come back and fix the mess Leo had inadvertently created. Arthur sat in his home office, looking at the sunlight streaming across the floor, and felt a surprising lack of urgency. "I'm not interested in coming back to my old desk, Sarah," he said, his voice calm and resonant. He realized that the push had actually been a shove into a much larger, more rewarding world of independence. Instead of returning as an employee, Arthur spent the weekend drafting a proposal for his own private consulting firm. He reached out to 3 other former clients who had reached out to him after hearing about the Q3 crisis. They didn't care about digital native culture fits or agile scrum buzzwords. They cared about results and trust. Arthur realized he didn't need a corner office at Miller & Associates to be the man with all the answers. He met David for lunch at a quiet bistro far away from the sterile glass and steel pressure of the corporate district. David offered him a retainer contract that paid more for 10 hours of work than Arthur had made in 40. "I don't need a manager, Arthur," David said, sliding a pen across the table. "I need an expert I can trust." For the first time in 30 years, Arthur was the one holding the pen and setting the terms of the agreement. He signed the contract with a steady hand, finally reclaiming the narrative of his own professional life. Arthur's journey reminds us that a career is more than a desk, a title, or a 30-year anniversary plaque. While the corporate world often prioritizes new over experienced and cheap over proven, true expertise is a portable asset. By the end of his journey, Arthur realized that his value didn't come from the company he worked for, but from the wisdom he carried within himself. The push that was meant to end his career actually became the catalyst for his independence. It serves as a powerful reminder that while we cannot always control how others value our time, we have full control over how we value our own legacy. And that is how Arthur turned a corporate push into a professional leap. He proved that 30 years of experience isn't a burden, it's a superpower. In a world that's always looking for the next big thing, never forget the value of the person who knows how the foundations were built. Throughout this story, we looked at some tough workplace vocabulary. We saw how voluntary isn't always a choice, and how downsizing can be a disguise for ageism. I hope these chapters helped you not only with your English fluency, but with seeing how to navigate real-life problems with dignity. What would you do in Arthur's shoes? Would you have helped Leo fix that data crisis, or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this 10-chapter journey, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Glisso for more stories that help you master English through real life. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.